"Don't dare me," I said to the most feared man in Chicago, and the whole room went so quiet I could hear the ice melting in somebody's whiskey. 20 minutes earlier, I had been nothing more than Chloe Bennett, a 24-year-old waitress in a black uniform that never fit right, balancing a silver tray through the Friday night rush at Bella Rosa, an upscale Italian restaurant where rich men came to be seen and women in diamonds laughed like rent was a myth. My feet ached. My smile ached. Everything in me ached. I had classes at 8 in the morning, a past-due tuition notice folded in my locker, and exactly $42.16 in my checking account after paying my mom's prescription copay that afternoon. So no, I was not in the mood for drama, which was probably why trouble found me anyway. It started with the front doors opening and the entire restaurant changing temperature. Not literally. It just felt that way. The conversation softened. The bartender straightened. Marco, our manager, nearly tripped over himself smoothing his tie. Even before I turned around, I knew whoever had walked in wasn't just important. Important people wanted attention. This was different. This was the kind of presence that made everyone else quietly measure their words. Vincent Moretti crossed the dining room like he owned the air in it. Tall, dark suit. No flash, no loud jewelry, nothing desperate. Just clean lines, expensive fabric, and the kind of control you can feel from across a room. He wasn't movie star handsome in the polished, harmless way. He was sharper than that. Dark hair brushed back from a face that never learned softness. A jaw built for saying no. Eyes so steady they made you feel like blinking first was a mistake. Men stood when he reached their table. Not because he asked. Because they knew better than to stay seated. I looked down fast and kept moving. That should have been the end of it. Men like Vincent Moretti did not notice women like me unless something had already gone wrong. I told myself that as I delivered a bottle of Brolo to table 12, collected dessert plates from the corner booth, and tried not to listen when two finance bros argued over steak temperatures like civilization depended on medium rare. I was doing fine until Marco hissed my name from the service station. VIP. Table. Now. He didn't need to say which one. My stomach tightened anyway. I grabbed a tray, loaded it with crystal water glasses, and walked toward the private section where Vincent sat with 4 other men in tailored suits. The lighting was low there, all amber glow and polished wood, but somehow that made the tension clearer. Nobody at that table laughed too loud. Nobody interrupted. They spoke in measured voices, and whenever Vincent looked up, everyone else stopped moving for half a beat, as if his attention itself came with rules. I stepped in, set the glasses down one by one, and kept my expression neutral. Still or sparkling? I asked. My voice sounded calm. That surprised me. One of the men smirked. He was younger than the others, maybe early 30s, with slick hair, a gold watch, and the loose confidence of someone who had never once been told no by life. Depends, he said, leaning back in his chair. What do you recommend, sweetheart? I hated sweetheart. It always arrived with that same lazy tone, like my name would cost too much respect. Still is more popular tonight, I said, keeping my eyes on the bottle. Then bring me whatever keeps you standing here longer. A couple of the other men smiled into their drinks. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I kept pouring. I had dealt with worse. Men with wedding rings and wandering hands. Men who mistook a tip for permission. Men who thought a woman carrying plates must also be carrying desperation. Usually, I let it slide. Brent did not care about pride. But then his hand caught my wrist. Not hard. Just enough. Just enough to say he thought he could. My tray tilted slightly, the stemware chiming together with a thin crystal sound that seemed unnaturally loud. I looked down at his fingers around my skin, then up at Vincent Moretti. Maybe because I could feel the whole room watching. Maybe because I was tired of swallowing things that burned on the way down. Maybe because something in Vincent's face said he had already seen exactly what happened and was waiting to find out what kind of woman I was. I set the tray down. Slowly. Carefully. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I pulled my wrist free, met the eyes of the man everyone else was afraid of, and said, "Don't dare me." The sentence landed between us like a lit match. The table went still. The music from the piano faded somewhere behind the bar. A woman near the window lowered her champagne glass halfway and forgot to lift it again. Vincent did not move right away. He just looked at me. Not amused. Not angry. Not shocked exactly. Just focused, in a way that made the rest of the restaurant disappear. Then his gaze shifted to the man beside him, the one still smiling like he thought this was entertainment. Vincent spoke so softly I almost missed it. Apologize. That smile vanished first. The silence came second. And that was the moment I realized my night was no longer mine. No one moved. It was strange how silence could feel louder than a shouted argument. It pressed against my skin, heavy and electric, while the man beside Vincent stared at him like he had misheard. I stood there with my hands still tingling from where he had grabbed my wrist, trying very hard not to show that my knees had started to shake. Marco had once told us that Bellarosa served 3 kinds of power: old money, political power, and the kind that never made the news. Looking at Vincent Moretti then, I understood exactly which kind had just walked through our doors. I am waiting, Vincent said, still in that same quiet voice. The man cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, trying to recover some dignity in front of the others. It was a joke. Vincent did not blink. Was it funny? No one answered. The candlelight flickered against the polished table. Crystal glasses gleamed. Somewhere near the bar, a fork hit a plate with a small metallic click, and the sound felt almost obscene in all that stillness. I should have walked away. Any sensible person would have picked up the tray, apologized for existing, and disappeared into the kitchen where ordinary problems lived, where spilled wine and late orders still mattered. But I stayed frozen because something about the way Vincent was looking at that man made it clear the moment had moved past me. I was no longer the center of it. I was the reason for it. The man finally turned toward me with a smile, so thin it looked painful. My apologies, he said. The words sounded expensive and empty, like they had never once been used sincerely in his life. I gave one nod because I did not trust my voice. Then Vincent looked at me. That was worse. Much worse. There was nothing careless in his expression, no heat, no obvious anger, no crude interest. Just focus. As if he had taken the entire room apart piece by piece and, for reasons I could not understand, set me aside instead of throwing me in with the rest. You may go, he said. He was speaking to me, but it sounded nothing like a dismissal, more like permission. I hated that it made my pulse jump. I reached for the tray. My fingers nearly slipped on the silver edge. I turned too fast, praying I could make it to the service station before my face gave me away. I got 3 steps. Chloe. I stopped dead. He had not asked my name earlier. I had not offered it. The room tilted a little under my feet. Slowly, I turned back. Vincent had not moved from his chair. Tell your manager I would like a word with him. There were a dozen ways he could have said that sentence. This one sounded polite enough to pass in public. It still made Marco, who had been lurking in the shadows near the host's stand, go pale from 20 feet away. Of course, I said. My own voice sounded distant to me. Controlled, but distant, like it belonged to somebody steadier. Then I walked away on legs that felt borrowed. The moment I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, the noise hit me all at once. Pans. Orders. The hiss of the grill. Real life rushing back in as if the dining room had been some strange sealed chamber where oxygen worked differently. Maria looked up from the espresso station and grabbed my elbow. What happened out there? She whispered. Please tell me you did not say something to that table. I set the tray down harder than I meant to. I did my job. Her eyes widened. That is not an answer. Before I could lie properly, Marco stormed in, sweat shining at his temples, tie crooked, expression pinched with panic. My office. Now. He did not even look at me when he said it, which somehow felt worse. I followed him past the dry storage shelves, past the freezer, into the narrow little office where he kept invoices and aspirin and 3 years of unprocessed stress. The second the door shut, he turned on me. Do you have any idea who that is? He demanded. Because if you do not, let me educate you before you ruin my life along with your own. He was not the one grabbing employees, I said, before common sense could stop me. Marco stared at me like I had started speaking Greek. That is what you are worried about right now. It is what should matter. My heart was still pounding, but once I started, I could not seem to stop. I was serving the table. Your customer put his hands on me. I pulled away. That should have been the end of it. Marco laughed once, short and humorless. In a normal restaurant, maybe. He ran a hand over his face. Chloe, listen carefully. Men like Vincent Moretti do not walk into places like this unless the whole room already belongs to them. If he asks for something, we say yes. If he is displeased, people lose jobs. Businesses lose leases. Lives get complicated in ways you do not want to understand. I folded my arms, partly because I was angry and partly because I needed to hide that they were shaking. Then maybe he should stop hiring friends who think waitresses are public property. Marco closed his eyes for one long second, as if he was praying for strength or patience or a new staff entirely. He asked to speak to me. Do you understand what that means? I looked at the office door, then back at him. It means he already knows your policies need work. Even I knew I should not have said that. But the strange thing was, once the fear passed a certain point, it stopped feeling sharp and started feeling clean. Simple. I was tired. I was overworked. I was underpaid. And somewhere out there in the dining room sat a man who could probably buy the building without checking his bank balance. None of that changed the fact that I was still me. Marco opened his mouth to respond, but there was a knock on the office door. 2 soft taps. Respectful. Controlled. Marco went white. And I knew, before he even whispered the name, exactly who had come in person instead. Marco did not say come in. He did not have to. The door opened anyway, not with force, not dramatically, just with the kind of quiet confidence that made locks and hesitation feel optional. Vincent Moretti stepped into that cramped little office like it belonged to him more than the man whose name was on the payroll forms stacked beside the printer. The room shrank instantly. That was the first thing I noticed. Not his height. Not the dark suit that somehow still looked untouched by the chaos of a busy restaurant. Not even the eyes that had already unsettled me once tonight. It was the way the air changed around him. The way Marco seemed to lose half his spine in a single breath. Mr. Moretti, Marco said, voice catching on the name. I was just coming to find you. Vincent glanced at him once, then at me. Were you? It was not an accusation. Somehow that made it worse. Marco gave a nervous laugh that died almost as soon as it left him. Of course. Absolutely. I was going to apologize for the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I repeated before I could stop myself. Marco shot me a look sharp enough to slice paper. Vincent did not look away from me. Is that how you saw it? He asked. The question was simple. His tone was not mocking. But there was something in it that felt dangerous in a different way, like he was not asking for the obvious answer. Like he was testing whether I would soften now that we were standing in a smaller room. No, I said. My heartbeat was loud enough to drown out reason. I saw a customer put his hands on me while I was working. Marco made a strangled sound that could have been my name or a prayer. Vincent was silent for a moment. Then he gave one short nod, as if I had confirmed a private suspicion. Good, he said. Then we agree. Marco blinked. Sir. Vincent finally turned his attention to him fully, and I watched the manager of Bella Rosa become smaller by the second. Your employee was disrespected in your dining room. By someone seated at my table. That reflects poorly on your establishment, and, by association, on me. Marco started nodding too fast. Yes. Yes, of course. It will not happen again. No, Vincent said softly. It will not. There was no threat in the words. None that a normal person could quote later, anyway. But the certainty of them slid across my skin like cold water. Marco swallowed so hard I heard it. I assure you, we value our staff. Chloe is one of our hardest workers. I nearly laughed at that. Not because it was false. Because he had never once said it before tonight. Vincent looked at me again, and for one strange second, I had the absurd feeling that he knew exactly what I was thinking. Hardworking, he said. And direct. That is one word for it, Marco muttered. It is my preferred word, Vincent replied. Silence settled over the office again, but it felt different this time. Less explosive. More precise. Controlled. Like something sharp laid carefully on a table between us. I folded my arms tighter, not because I was cold, but because I needed the pressure to stay steady. If this is the part where I am supposed to thank you, I said, I do not think I can do that honestly. Marco looked like he might actually faint. Vincent did not seem offended. If anything, his expression sharpened with interest. Honesty is rare, he said. That does not make it comfortable. It also does not make it kindness. The words slipped out before I could polish them into something safer. You corrected him, yes. But everyone out there saw it. Tomorrow they will not talk about what he did. They will talk about what you allowed and what you stopped. Marco made a desperate little gesture with both hands. Chloe, enough. But Vincent lifted one finger, and Marco fell silent immediately. I hated that. I hated how quickly power rearranged the room. Go on, Vincent said to me. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to shut up, to finally choose survival over impulse. But another part, the part that had gotten me through 3 years of double shifts and night classes and insurance forms for my mother that always seemed designed to humiliate people, was too tired to pretend. You asked for an apology because it reflected badly on you, I said. Not because it was wrong. That landed. I could tell it did, because Vincent went completely still. Not angry still. Thinking still. The kind that made my stomach twist harder than shouting ever could. Marco stared at me like I had just signed my own termination papers in permanent ink. I waited for the temperature in the room to drop. Waited for the cold dismissal. The punishment. The warning. Instead, Vincent asked, "And if both are true?" I frowned. "What?" "If it reflected badly on me," he said, "and it was wrong." His voice stayed level, but something had shifted underneath it. Not softness. Not yet. Just a different kind of attention. More personal. More inconvenient. "Would that fit your moral requirements, Miss Bennett?" I should have backed down then. I should have let the strange edge in his tone stay unexplored. But he had used my name again, and there was something unsettling about hearing it in his mouth, as if he had memorized it for later. "No," I said quietly, "because if it mattered that much, I would not still be standing here trying to explain basic decency to a man everyone else is afraid to correct." For the first time that night, Marco looked at me with pure horror. Vincent, on the other hand, did something far more confusing. He almost smiled. It was not warmth. It was not mockery either. It was the expression of a man who had just discovered a language he had not expected anyone in the room to speak. "Basic decency," he repeated, as if testing the phrase for weight. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Marco inhaled sharply. I did not move, though every nerve in my body lit up. Vincent pulled out a slim black card, turned to the desk, and set it beside the tipped-over employee schedule with absurd neatness. "If your manager gives you any trouble for tonight," he said, looking only at me now, "you will call that number." My eyes dropped to the card, then back to him. "I do not need your protection. That is not what I offered." His gaze held mine for one beat too long. "It is an alternative." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the office quieter than before and somehow far more dangerous. Marco stared at the card like it might explode. I stared at the door, and for the first time all night, I realized the worst part was not that Vincent Moretti had noticed me. It was that I could not shake the feeling. He had decided not to forget me. Marco fired me before the kitchen had even finished plating dessert. He did not use the word fired at first. Men like Marco never did when they wanted to feel reasonable. He called it protecting the restaurant. He called it avoiding complications. He called it a temporary pause until things settled down. But when he took my apron from the hook by the dry storage door and would not meet my eyes, the truth sat there between us, plain and ugly. "You embarrassed me," he said, rubbing one hand over his jaw like this had all been harder on him than on me. "In front of the most dangerous client this place has ever had." I laughed once, sharp and tired. "I embarrassed you." He flinched at my tone. "Good. A man put his hands on me in your dining room, Marco. And it was handled. By him, not by you." His face hardened in that small, mean way weak men have when they know they are wrong and need to punish someone anyway. "You do not understand how the world works, Chloe." "No," I said, grabbing my bag from the locker with more force than necessary. "I understand exactly how it works. That is the problem." He held out my final cash tips in a white envelope like it was some grand gesture of fairness. I took it because rent did not care where money came from. Then I walked out through the back alley with my coat half-buttoned and anger buzzing under my skin like bad caffeine. It was just past midnight. The wind off the lake cut through my sweater immediately, sharp and wet and cruel in the way Chicago weather specialized in from November through March. Streetlights painted the pavement in streaks of pale gold. My old Honda sat 3 blocks away because Bella Rosa reserved the good parking for people whose paychecks had commas in them. I started walking fast, heels clicking hard against cracked concrete, trying not to think about the tuition payment due in 6 days, or the electric bill already late, or the way my mother had smiled that morning when I promised I had everything under control. I hated lying to her. I hated that she made it so easy by believing me. By the time I reached the corner pharmacy, my hands were numb. I stopped under the awning to fish my keys out of my bag, and almost missed the black SUV parked across the street. Almost. It sat too clean, too still, too deliberate for this neighborhood. The windows were tinted dark enough to turn the city lights into black mirrors. My stomach dropped before my brain could catch up. I knew that vehicle. I had only seen it once, but some things branded themselves on your memory after a single night. I looked away immediately and kept walking. Fast. Not running. Running would have admitted fear, and I was not ready to give him that even in private. The sound of a car door opening behind me was quiet. Controlled. Expensive. Footsteps followed, measured and unhurried, which somehow made them worse. Miss Bennett. I stopped at the curb with a bitter laugh caught in my throat. Of course he would not shout. Of course he would not chase. Men like Vincent Moretti did not hurry. The world adjusted its speed around them. I turned slowly. He stood 10 feet away beneath the pharmacy sign, dark coat buttoned against the cold, hands bare despite the weather, as if winter itself had chosen not to inconvenience him. Up close, away from the amber restaurant lighting, he looked even more severe. Cleaner lines. Sharper edges. A face made for being obeyed. Did you have my manager stationed outside to report on my unemployment in real time? I asked. Or is stalking waitresses just a hobby for you? One corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. You assume I do my own surveillance. That is not a no. No, he said. It is not. I should have kept walking. I knew that. But there was something infuriating about the honesty of the answer. No apology. No false charm. Just a statement, offered like we were discussing weather. What do you want? I asked. A conversation. You had one. In the office. It cost me my job. His gaze sharpened. He let you go? That surprises you. It disappoints me. I folded my arms tighter across my chest, hating that the motion looked defensive. You do not get to be disappointed. You are the complication, remember? The wind lifted a strand of hair across my face. I shoved it back impatiently. Vincent watched the movement for one beat, then stepped closer just enough for the streetlight to catch his eyes. Dark. Steady. Impossible to read all the way through. You think I came here because I enjoy making your life harder? He said. I think men like you never notice when they do. That one landed. I saw it in the slight stillness that followed. Again, not anger. Thought. He was always worse when he was quiet. You were dismissed because your manager lacks a spine, he said at last. Not because you were wrong. That distinction does not pay my bills. No, his voice dropped lower. But I can. I stared at him. The traffic light changed above us, washing the wet pavement first red, then green. Somewhere down the block, a train rattled over elevated tracks. Normal city sounds. Ordinary sounds. They made the moment feel stranger, not less. There it is, I said softly. I was wondering how long it would take. You assume I am trying to buy your silence. Are not you? He stepped closer again, enough that I caught the faint scent of cedar and cold air clinging to his coat. Still not touching me. Not even close. But the space between us felt intentional now, selected with surgical precision. If I wanted silence, he said, I would not be standing here asking for your opinion. I should have laughed. Instead, I just stood there, suddenly too aware of the white envelope in my pocket, the overdue bills on my kitchen counter, the cost of my mother's medication, the brutal, humiliating math of being poor in a city that charged extra for breathing. Vincent reached into his coat, and every muscle in my body tensed until he pulled out nothing more threatening than a folded receipt. He held it toward me. There is a diner around the corner still open, he said. You have not eaten since 4:30 this afternoon. My breath caught. How do you know that? Because you went straight from class to work, drank coffee instead of dinner, and nearly dropped a tray when your blood sugar crashed at 9:15. The world narrowed to the space between his hand and my face. You had someone watching me. No, he said. I was watching you. And that should have sent me walking straight into the night. Instead, against all logic, all instinct, all common sense, I stood there on a freezing Chicago sidewalk and realized. The truly dangerous thing about Vincent Moretti was not that he could command a room. It was that he paid attention. I should have walked away the second he said that. Any smart woman would have. Any woman with less debt, less pride, or less exhaustion probably would have. But standing there under the harsh white pharmacy sign with the cold needling through my coat, and Vincent Moretti looking at me like I was the only thing in the city worth focusing on, smart had started to feel like a luxury item. That is not comforting, I said. My voice came out flatter than I felt. It was not meant to be. Of course it was not. Men like him did not waste time pretending to be harmless. That should have made him easier to hate. Instead, it made him harder to dismiss. He still held out the folded receipt from the diner around the corner. A stupid thing, really. Thin paper. Blue ink. A list of ordinary food from an ordinary place wedged between a pharmacy and a laundromat that still had a broken neon sign in the window. The kind of place nobody important ever noticed. The kind of place men like Vincent Moretti probably passed every day without seeing. You expect me to have dinner with you, I said. I expect you to eat, he replied. Whether you do it with me is apparently still under negotiation. I stared at him for a second, then let out one short breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh if I had been less tired. You always talk like that. Like what? Like every sentence has already won an argument. He actually looked amused then, faintly, which was somehow more disorienting than if he had smiled outright. Not every argument, he said. Just the ones I take seriously. The answer sat between us a second too long. I looked away first, which annoyed me. Across the street, the black SUV waited at the curb like a threat wrapped in polished paint. I hated that I knew exactly where this could go. Rich man. Problem disguised as protection. Offer disguised as kindness. Strings disguised as silk. I had seen enough of life to know that free things usually cost the most. I am not getting in your car, I said. I did not ask you to. Vincent turned slightly and gestured with 2 fingers toward the diner's glowing sign half a block away. It is 40 yards. Even by Chicago standards, I can survive the walk. I looked from him to the diner and back again. The windows were fogged with steam. Inside, I could see 2 men in construction jackets hunched over coffee and a woman in pink scrubs stirring creamer into a paper cup. Ordinary people. Bright lights. No velvet ropes. No dark private rooms. No reason for my pulse to be beating like this. 1 cup of coffee, I said finally. 10 minutes. You should not negotiate from hunger, he said. It weakens your leverage. I was not asking your opinion. You rarely do. Something in the way he said it made me feel like he found that refreshing. That bothered me almost as much as the fact that I stepped toward the diner instead of away from it. He fell into pace beside me without crowding me, hands in his coat pockets, matching my stride exactly and making it feel accidental even though I knew better. On the sidewalk, a couple passed us laughing over something on a phone screen. A cab splashed through a shallow puddle at the corner. The city kept moving. Nobody looked twice. That, more than anything, made the whole situation surreal. Because Vincent Moretti did not fit into normal life. He bent it. Yet here he was, walking beside me toward a diner that sold pie by the slice and had not updated its menu board since before I was born. Inside, warmth hit me first. Then coffee. Then frying butter and sugar and the low hum of late-night conversation that belonged to people with ordinary problems. A waitress in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair looked up from behind the counter, saw Vincent, and went visibly still. Not frightened, just alert in the way staff get when money enters the room wearing a coat that costs more than their monthly rent. Booth in the back, she said quickly. He nodded once. No arrogance. No charm. Just the ease of a man accustomed to the world arranging itself before he asked. I slid into the vinyl booth first because I refused to let him choose my side of the table. Petty maybe, but it made me feel marginally less cornered. He sat across from me, long fingers, resting loosely near the menu he did not need to open. In the diner's bright overhead lights, he looked different. Still dangerous. Still too composed. But stripped of the low restaurant glow and the theater of a private table, he seemed more real somehow. More human. That realization felt like a trap, so I pushed it away immediately. The waitress appeared with 2 waters and a coffee pot. What can I get you? She asked. Eyes on me, not him. I appreciated that more than I could explain. Coffee, I said. And whatever pie is least likely to ruin my life. Her mouth twitched. Apple. Then apple. She turned to Vincent. Sir. Turkey Club. Black coffee. No hesitation. No performance. Just a man ordering dinner after midnight. When she walked away, I leaned back against the booth and folded my arms. You really do not hear yourself, do you? I asked. Enlighten me. You appear outside my job after I get fired. Inform me you have been paying attention to details no stranger should know, and then guide me into a diner like this is normal. It is normal, he said. For me, that is not helping. I did not say it would. The coffee arrived, hot and dark and fragrant enough to make my stomach twist with sudden need. I wrapped both hands around the mug just to feel something solid. Vincent watched the gesture, then looked at my face again. Always my face. Never lower. Never in that lingering way men sometimes did when they thought a waitress could be reduced to parts if they wanted badly enough. I noticed that. I hated that I noticed it. Why me? I asked before I could talk myself out of it. There are 100 women in this city who would smile at whatever game you are playing. I am not playing a game. Then that is worse. His eyes held mine for a beat. Probably. The honesty of that knocked the air out of the booth for a second. I took a sip of coffee to cover it. Too hot. I nearly winced, swallowed anyway. He noticed that too. Of course he did. You said something in that office, he said after a moment. About basic decency. I said nothing. No one speaks to me like that. You say that like it is a compliment. It is not. He glanced toward the front window where sleet had started ticking against the glass. It is an indictment. I blinked at him. Of you, of the people around me. The pie came then, steaming and cinnamon sweet, the crust golden and uneven in the way only good diner pie ever is. I looked at it like it might be a personal betrayal, because no one had offered to feed me in years without wanting something I could not afford to give back. Vincent picked up his coffee, took one measured sip, and set the cup down again. Eat, Chloe, he said quietly. You can mistrust me and still take care of yourself. And that was the moment I realized the real problem was not that Vincent Moretti had entered my life. It was that, piece by piece, he kept saying the exact things I did not know how to defend against. I ate the pie because I was hungry enough to resent being seen. That was the humiliating part. Not the apple filling or the flaky crust or the way warmth spread through me so fast, it almost felt like weakness. It was the fact that Vincent sat across from me and said nothing while I took the first 3 bites too quickly, as if he understood that embarrassment had sharp edges and any comment from him would only make them cut deeper. The turkey club arrived a minute later, stacked high with toasted bread and sliced tomatoes that looked too red for January. He ate with the same precise control he seemed to bring to everything else. No wasted motion. No restless glance at his phone. No attempt to fill the silence, just because most people were afraid of it. It should not have unsettled me, the simple fact that he could sit still without turning every second into a performance. But it did. You are staring, I said finally, setting down my fork. I am listening. To what? I have not said anything for 2 full minutes. Exactly. I exhaled through my nose. Do you ever answer a question like a normal person? Rarely. I noticed. The waitress refilled our coffee and left us with the kind of polite indifference I wished I felt. Outside, sleet striped the windows in silver lines. Inside, the diner glowed warm and ordinary and so painfully unlike the rest of the night that I kept expecting the illusion to break. It did not. Vincent finished half his sandwich before he spoke again. You should not have lost your job for telling the truth. I looked up from the pie. And yet, he agreed. I leaned back against the booth and crossed my arms, not because I was angry exactly, but because the shape of this conversation kept shifting under my feet. Let us say I believe that, I said. What then? You write me a recommendation letter? Buy the restaurant and fire Marco properly? Have one of your terrifying men in dark coats scare him into developing a conscience? Vincent set his coffee cup down with a soft click. You think in extremes. I think in consequences. His gaze stayed on me, steady as ever. That is wiser. Do not do that. Do what? Say things that sound like compliments when they are really just observations. For the first time since we sat down, there was something almost human in his expression. Not softness. Not yet. But maybe recognition. And if they are both, he asked. I looked away before my face could betray anything. That was the problem with Vincent Moretti. He did not flirt. He did not flatter. He noticed. Which was worse, because there was no easy defense against someone who paid attention without trying to charm you first. I can get you another job, he said after a moment. There it was. The string hidden inside the silk. No, you did not ask what kind. I do not need to. I pushed my empty pie plate aside and wrapped both hands around my coffee mug again. I know how this works. You help me, and suddenly I owe you. Maybe not today. Maybe not in any way I can point to. But eventually there is a price. Vincent was quiet, so long I almost thought he would let it go. Then he said, Who taught you that? The question caught me off guard. I hated that. Life, I said flatly. That is not specific enough. It is after midnight. You are not entitled to my autobiography. No, he said. I am not entitled to anything from you. The way he said it made the air between us shift again. Less like a negotiation. more like a line being drawn with care. I studied his face, looking for the arrogance that should have been there, the impatience, the offense. I found none of it. Just that same unsettling attention. Then stop acting like you can rearrange my life because you disapprove of what happened. I am not trying to rearrange your life. You are already in it. That landed harder than I intended. His eyes darkened slightly, though his expression barely changed. Yes, he said. I am. The honesty of it hit me low and strange, somewhere behind my ribs. I looked down at the table, at the tiny chips in the laminate near the sugar caddy, at anything except the man across from me who kept telling the truth in the least convenient ways possible. My mother thinks I still work weekends at the bookstore on Halstead, I said before I could stop myself. Vincent did not interrupt. I quit there last spring because the owner cut hours, but she had just started a new treatment plan and I could not tell her we were that close to falling behind. So I picked up more shifts at Bella Rosa and moved my classes around and pretended everything was fine. I let out one humorless laugh. It is amazing how expensive pretending is. He listened the way he did everything else. Completely. No nodding too much. No fake sympathy face. Just focus. What is her name? He asked. I frowned. Why? Because you brought her into the conversation. Because if she matters to you, I would rather know her name than refer to her as your mother like a stranger. No man had ever said something like that to me. Not with that kind of simple logic. Not like it cost him nothing and everything at once. Elaine, I said quietly. Her name is Elaine. He repeated it once, low enough that it almost disappeared under the hum of the diner. And your classes? Nursing program at Roosevelt. I graduate in May if the universe feels generous. Does it usually? Not in my experience. One side of his mouth moved, the ghost of that almost smile again. Not in mine either. I should not have asked the next question. It was reckless in a different way than standing up to him had been. More intimate. More dangerous. Then what do you want from me, Vincent? The use of his first name changed something. I saw it. Tiny. Immediate. His hand stilled. Near the coffee cup. His gaze held mine and did not let go. The diner noise faded at the edges again. Forks. Radio. Cash register. All of it distant. The truth, he asked. You seem allergic to anything else. He leaned back slightly, but his eyes never left my face. I want to know why a woman with every reason to be afraid looked at me tonight like I was just another man who needed to be corrected. My throat tightened. Maybe because you were. For one suspended second, he did not answer. Then he gave the smallest nod, as if I had confirmed something important. The check arrived a minute later without either of us asking for it. Vincent reached for it. I put my hand on the black folder first. Reflex. Pride. Habit. Something. His fingers stopped an inch away from mine. No contact. Just heat in the space between us and his gaze lifting to meet mine. Do not, I said softly. I invited you. I still have money. I did not say you did not. Then let me pay for my own pie. He held my eyes for one beat, then leaned back and let his hand fall away. All right. It should not have mattered. It was just a bill in a diner after midnight. But the fact that he yielded, that he let me keep that small square of control without turning it into a fight, unsettled me more than any power move would have. I paid in cash from the envelope Marco handed me like severance from my own dignity. We stood in silence when it was done. Outside, the sleet had turned to snow, light and stubborn and drifting sideways under the street lamps. Vincent buttoned his coat. I will drive you home, he said. No, it is late. Still no. You are determined to make sensible offers difficult. And you are determined to make control sound courteous. That almost smile appeared again, gone before I could be sure it was real. Perhaps. He followed me to the door anyway, holding it open as the cold rushed in around us. I stepped onto the sidewalk and stopped short. Across the street, where my old Honda should have been waiting 3 blocks down, a familiar figure stood under the pharmacy awning with a cigarette burning between 2 fingers. Derek Hale. My ex. The one person. I had not told where I worked. The one person who was supposed to be out of my life for good. He looked up, saw me, and smiled like he had been patient long enough. When I heard Vincent go still beside me, I knew the night had just found a new way to get worse. Derek had always known how to make an ordinary street feel unsafe. He did not have to shout. He did not have to move fast. He just had to stand there like he belonged in my path. And suddenly the cold felt sharper, the snow looked meaner, and the air in my lungs forgot how to work right. He flicked ash onto the sidewalk and smiled the way he used to right before saying something cruel enough to keep me awake for days. "There you are," he said, like we had plans, like showing up outside a diner after midnight was normal, like the months since I left him had been a minor scheduling issue instead of a hard-won escape. Every muscle in my body locked. I hated that he could still do that. I hated it more because Vincent noticed. Beside me, he did not speak. He did not step forward. He did not turn this into theater. He just went very still, and somehow that felt like the room at Bella Rosa all over again. That same charged silence before something shifted. Derek looked from me to Vincent and let out a low laugh. "Wow," he said. "You move on fast." The line was familiar too. That blend of accusation and ownership, as if my life had paused waiting for his approval. I forced my jaw to unclench. "This is not your business, Derek." "Funny," he said, pushing off the awning post and taking a few slow steps closer. "Because your mom said you were studying tonight. She seemed surprised when I asked where you work now." The world narrowed so hard I almost swayed. He had gone to my mother. My mother, who trusted too easily, who still answered the door with a smile and a cardigan even when the city had taught everyone else to look through the peephole first. Heat flashed through me, bright and sick. "You need to stay away from her," I said. My voice came out low. Shaky but low. Derek shrugged like we were discussing weather. I was being nice. She invited me in. Beside me, Vincent spoke for the first time. "You are mistaken." Derek frowned. "Excuse me." Vincent's tone did not rise. It did not need to. "You believe her mother invited you in because she wanted your company. What likely happened is that she was polite." Derek stared at him, thrown off by the calm certainty of it. Most men, when faced with someone like Derek, either tried too hard to look tough or backed down so fast it smelled like fear. Vincent did neither. He stood with his coat buttoned, snow catching in his dark hair, hands at his sides, and looked at Derek like he was a problem already half solved. "Who the hell are you?" Derek asked. "Someone who understands boundaries," Vincent said. "Which puts me at an advantage." I almost closed my eyes. Because there it was again. That exact way he had of cutting through a moment without raising his voice, leaving the other person to realize too late that they had already lost ground. Derek laughed, but it came out thin. "Chloe, seriously? This guy? Do not use my name like you know me." I snapped. His face changed instantly. Not much. Just enough. The softness vanished. The real Derek stepped closer to the surface. "I know you better than he does. That is not the argument you think it is." He ignored that and looked me over in a way that made my skin crawl, not because it was openly crude, but because it felt like inventory. Old habits. Old claims. "You disappear, block my number, switch jobs, and now I find you coming out of a diner with some Wall Street wannabe in a designer coat." The insult was pathetic, but the intention behind it was not. It was never about being right. It was about getting me to react, to explain, to defend, to step back into the old dance where he provoked and I paid for it emotionally. I knew that dance too well. Vincent must have sensed something in the way I went quiet, because when he spoke again, his voice changed by half a shade. Still calm. Colder now. "You are agitated," he said to Derek. "Take another step toward her, and this conversation ends badly for your pride." Derek blinked. "You threatening me?" "No," Vincent said. "I am informing you." Snow drifted sideways between them, catching in the diner's neon light. A taxi splashed past the curb. Somewhere above us, the train rattled again. The city moved on, indifferent, while my pulse hammered so hard it felt like the whole street should be able to hear it. Derek turned back to me, and that was worse somehow. His face softened into that false concern he used when he wanted to make other people think I was difficult, emotional, unstable. "Chloe, come on. I just want to talk." My stomach turned. "At my mother's apartment?" I asked. "At my job." He spread his hands like I was being unreasonable. "You were not answering me." That was the answer. He went still then, really still, and I knew I had finally said the one thing men like Derek hated most. Not an insult. Not a raised voice. Finality. Rejection without apology. It made something ugly flicker across his face. Not enough for anyone to call it dangerous in a police report. More than enough for me to recognize it. Vincent must have recognized it too, because when Derek shifted his weight forward again, Vincent stepped between us with such quiet efficiency that I did not even register the movement until Derek was no longer looking directly at me. He was looking at Vincent's shoulder instead. You should leave, Vincent said. Derek laughed again, but it sounded forced now. Or what? Or you will embarrass yourself further in front of someone whose opinion of you is already unsalvageable. I would have remembered that sentence for the rest of my life, even if the rest of the night had ended there. Because Vincent did not try to dominate Derek with volume or threat. He did something far crueler. He reduced him, stripped him of performance, left him nowhere dramatic to stand. Derek looked over Vincent's shoulder at me, maybe hoping I would soften, maybe hoping habit would rescue him the way it used to. It did not. I held his gaze and said the words that should have come months earlier. If you come near my mother again, I will call the police. If you come near me again, I will not be polite about it. His mouth tightened. You think this guy is going to save you? I do not know what answer he expected. Gratitude, maybe. Fear. Dependency. Something weak. Instead, I heard my own voice, clear and steady in the falling snow. No, I said. I think I am done needing permission to leave. Derek stared at me like he had never seen me before. Maybe he had not. Maybe I had not either. He looked at Vincent one last time, measured something in that unreadable face, and finally took a step back. Then another. This is not over, he muttered. Vincent did not even glance at him. For you, he said. It is. Derek walked away without another word, shoulders tight, cigarette crushed beneath his heel at the curb. I watched until he disappeared past the pharmacy and into the blur of snow and headlights. Only then did my knees remember they had options. The cold rushed back and around me. My breath shook on the way out. Vincent turned slightly, enough that I could see his profile in the neon glow. He has been contacting your mother for how long? He asked. Not are you all right? Not did he scare you. Just the question that mattered. Practical. Precise. And for some reason, that nearly undid me more than comfort would have. I do not know, I said honestly. I changed my number 3 months ago. I moved 2 months ago. I thought. My voice failed. I hated that. I looked away. I thought if I kept enough distance, he would eventually get bored. Vincent was quiet for one beat. Men like that do not get bored, he said softly. They get offended. The truth of it landed deep because it was not theatrical, just accurate. I wrapped my arms around myself and looked down at the thin layer of snow collecting on the sidewalk. I can handle Derek. That is not the point. Then what is? He turned fully toward me, and in the cold, under the diner's sign, with the city throwing light around us in broken colors, his face looked harder than ever. But his voice, when it came, was controlled in a different way. Not distant. Deliberate. The point, he said, is that now I know what has been teaching you to mistake vigilance for independence. I almost snapped back at him. The words were already there, lined up behind my teeth, sharp and tired and defensive in all the ways I had learned to survive. Vigilance was what had kept me from answering Derek's calls. Vigilance was what made me check the lock twice before bed and look over my shoulder walking to class and memorize license plates without meaning to. Vigilance was not weakness. It was practice. It was muscle memory. It was the closest thing I had to peace. But standing there in the snow with Vincent Moretti looking at me like he had just uncovered the blueprint beneath my skin, I could not force the old response out. Because the worst part was that he was not entirely wrong. Do not do that, I said quietly. Do what? Say something accurate in the most infuriating way possible. A faint line appeared between his brows. Not confusion exactly. More like concentration. I was not trying to infuriate you. Then you are naturally gifted. One corner of his mouth shifted, gone before I could decide if it counted as a smile. The snow kept falling, light at first, then thicker, blurring the edges of parked cars and storefronts until the whole block looked softer than it felt. My hands were freezing. My nerves were worse. The crash after adrenaline had started to set in, leaving my limbs heavy and my thoughts too slow in some places, too quick in others. Vincent noticed that too. Of course he did. I will drive you home, he said again. I opened my mouth to refuse on instinct. He spoke before I could. You do not have to trust me. You do, however, need to get off this sidewalk. I hated the fact that he was right. Hated it because I was tired, because Derek had just found me through my mother, because my car was still 3 blocks away in the wrong direction, because the snow was sticking now and I could already feel tomorrow's headache building behind my eyes. Mostly I hated it because accepting anything from Vincent felt like stepping onto ground that might move later. One ride, I said. You do not get my address permanently memorized into whatever private file you keep in that terrifying head of yours. He looked at me for one long second. I already know where you live, Chloe. My pulse kicked hard. That was not the reassurance you thought it was. No, he said. It was honesty. He turned toward the SUV and opened the back passenger door himself. No driver appeared. No bodyguard in a dark coat emerged from nowhere. Just Vincent, snow gathering on his shoulders, waiting without impatience and without apology. I stood there another beat, arguing with every instinct I had. Then I got in. The leather seat was warm. That startled me more than it should have. Outside, the city looked gray and blurred through the tinted window, all red brake lights and white street lamps smeared by falling snow. Inside, the SUV smelled faintly of cedar and cold air and something expensive I could not name. Vincent slid into the seat beside me, not across from me, not close enough to crowd. The door shut with a muted, final sound that made the whole world outside feel farther away. This is exactly how bad decisions begin, I muttered, with accurate self-assessment. With heated seats and a man who treats surveillance like a personality trait. That got the almost smile again. He tapped once on the dark partition in front of us, and the SUV pulled away from the curb so smoothly I barely felt it move. Tell me about Derek, he said. I laughed under my breath, humorless. No, his head turned slightly. No. You do not get to ask me personal questions because you happened to be standing next to me when he showed up. I was standing next to you because I chose to be. That is not helping your case. He accepted that with a silence that should have felt like surrender and somehow did not. The city slid past outside in streaks of silver and black. We crossed under the train tracks, past a clothes florist, a 24-hour laundromat with 2 lonely machines still spinning. My neighborhood was not glamorous. It was practical. Cheap rent, old brick, too much noise in summer and not enough heat in winter. The kind of place people with money only entered by mistake. He is your ex, Vincent said finally. He is a mistake with good hair and excellent timing. How long were you together? I stared at the window. You do not know when to stop. I know exactly when to stop. I am choosing not to. That should not have been attractive. It was not, I told myself immediately. It was alarming. Exhausting. A red flag in an expensive coat. A year, I said, because the truth had already started opening its own doors tonight, and I was too tired to hold all of them shut. Closer to 14 months if you count the part where leaving him became a project instead of a decision. Vincent said nothing for a moment. You lived together. I turned to look at him. How did you know that? You said moved, not moved out. There is a difference. I stared at him, then looked away again because the alternative was admitting how unnerving it felt to be read that cleanly. For 6 months, I said. It was cheaper. He was charming at first. Helpful. Reliable. The kind of man who remembered to buy your favorite cereal and made coffee before you woke up. My throat tightened around the next part, but I kept going because stopping now would have made it worse. Then he started noticing what I wore, who I texted, how long I stayed after class. He called it concern. Then he called it love. Then he called me ungrateful whenever I wanted one evening to myself. The words came out flatter than the memories felt. I had told versions of this story before, mostly to myself, mostly in the dark, trying to turn confusion into sequence. Vincent listened without interruption. Not even a single pointless sound of sympathy. Just attention. Careful and complete. He never had to do anything dramatic, I said. That is what people do not understand. Control can look ordinary if you stretch it out over enough weeks. It can sound like somebody asking where you are. It can feel like compromise until one day you realize your whole life has been resized around somebody else's moods. The SUV turned left onto my block. I could have told him to stop there. Could have thanked him with formal distance and stepped back into my own life before this strange, dangerous thread between us pulled any tighter. Instead, I kept talking. Maybe because the dark window made confession easier. Maybe because he had already seen enough to guess the shape of the truth. He did not like that I kept money separate, I said. He hated my nursing program because it took time away from him. He said my mother depended on me too much. He said any man who looked twice at me was disrespecting him, not me. The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Everything was about him, even my fear. Vincent's jaw tightened once. That was all. But I saw it. And when you left? He asked. He cried, I said. Then promised to change. Then sent flowers. then sent messages, then showed up outside class, then started asking mutual friends where I was. When I blocked his number, he emailed. When I moved, he found my mother. My hands were clasped too tightly in my lap. I forced them apart. So yes, vigilance. Practice. Muscle memory. Call it whatever you want. The SUV slowed in front of my building, a tired 3-story brick walk-up with a busted porch light and a front door that always stuck in wet weather. Home, if you were generous. Survival, if you were honest. Vincent did not immediately unlock the door. He looked at the building once, then back at me. This is not vigilance, he said quietly. This is adaptation to prolonged pressure. I let out a short breath. That sounds like something a therapist would say. It sounds like something a man should have recognized sooner. I frowned. Sooner than what? He held my gaze for one beat too long. Sooner than tonight. My heart stumbled once, stupidly, annoyingly. Because there was no reason that sentence should have mattered. No reason it should have landed warm somewhere I had spent months trying to keep cold. Vincent reached for the door handle, then paused. Do not go inside alone tonight. I blinked at him. Excuse me. Call your mother from upstairs. Not the hallway. Lock your door. If Derek has a key, change the lock tomorrow morning. I will have someone. He stopped himself. Recalibrated. I can recommend a locksmith if necessary. I almost smiled despite everything. Almost. Look at you, I said. Learning boundaries. I learned quickly when the lesson is worth learning. There it was again. That impossible, infuriating way he had of saying something that sounded almost like too much and somehow not enough at the same time. I reached for the handle before he could open it for me. Thank you for the ride, I said carefully, giving each word exactly the weight I meant. Nothing more. Nothing less. Vincent inclined his head once. Chloe. I paused. Yes. Do not mistake being used to danger for being safe inside it. I looked at him then, really looked, with the dim light from the street lamp cutting shadows across his face and snow still melting. Slowly at the collar of his coat. For the first time since I had met him, he did not look like the most powerful man in any room. He looked like someone who knew exactly what he was warning me about. And that was far more unsettling. I stood on the sidewalk for a full 5 seconds after the SUV pulled away, snow settling on my shoulders, Vincent's last sentence still lodged somewhere under my ribs where I did not want it. Then the taillights disappeared at the corner, and the world became ordinary again in the ugliest possible way. My building was still my building. The porch light was still dead. The front door still stuck in damp weather, forcing me to shoulder it twice before it gave way with a groan that echoed through the narrow hall. Old radiator heat wrapped around me in uneven waves, too warm by the mailboxes and useless on the stairs. I climbed to the second floor with my keys threaded between my fingers out of habit, not fear, I told myself. Just habit. Just practice. Just muscle memory. The lie was getting thinner every time I used it. Apartment 2B smelled like laundry detergent, generic tomato soup, and the lavender candle my mother insisted made the place feel calmer even though neither of us actually liked lavender. Home. Small kitchen. Faded rug. Second-hand sofa with the loose armrest. The familiar sight of it should have settled me. Instead, it only made the night feel stranger, as if Bellarosa and the diner and Derek under the pharmacy awning had happened to somebody else who happened to be wearing my face. Chloe, my mother called from the bedroom, her voice soft with sleep and medication haze. That you, honey? I closed the door, locked it, checked it twice, then leaned my forehead briefly against the wood before answering. Yes, Mom. Go back to sleep. She was awake by the time I stepped into her room anyway, sitting up against her pillows with her reading glasses crooked and her silver blonde hair flattened on one side. Cancer had thinned her, sharpened her in places life had once softened, but her eyes were still the same blue-gray as mine. Tired tonight. Worried too. You are late, she said. Then she took in my face and straightened. What happened? I should have lied. I always lied first when it came to protecting her peace. But I was too exhausted to build something convincing. I lost my job. The words hit the room with a dull little thud. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, not dramatically, just automatically, like her body still had not gotten the memo that sudden stress was now an expensive hobby. Oh, sweetheart. It is fine. I heard myself say it, and almost laughed. It is not fine, actually, but it is survivable. She pushed the blanket aside as if she were about to get up, and I moved to the bed immediately. No, do not. Stay where you are. Tell me what happened. There it was. The gentle version of the same demand Vincent had made all night. Tell me the truth. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked at a loose thread in the comforter because looking directly at her made it harder. A customer crossed a line. I did not handle it in the way my manager would have preferred. My mother was quiet for a second. Did someone hurt you? No, the answer came too fast. I forced myself to breathe and tried again. No, but someone thought he could get away with disrespecting me, and I was too tired to smile through it. Her gaze sharpened in that familiar mother way, the one that saw every version of me at once, from 6 years old with scraped knees to 24 and pretending I had everything under control. And your manager punished you for not making it easy. I looked at her then. Basically, she sighed, small and weary and sad in a way that made me want to tear the whole night apart with my bare hands and rebuild it into something she never had to know. You have your father's mouth, she murmured, and your grandmother's refusal to bend. 2 traits that should maybe come with a warning label. Maybe. She reached for my hand. Her fingers felt cool and fragile and still somehow stronger than most people's whole personalities. Do not let anyone make you regret defending your dignity, Chloe. I swallowed hard. That would be easier if dignity covered rent. Her mouth twitched. That has always been its weakest quality. I laughed then, an actual laugh, small but real, and it hurt more than crying would have. She watched my face another moment, and then her expression changed. Softer, more careful. Derek came by yesterday. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Yesterday? She nodded slowly. He said he wanted to make sure we were all right. He brought flowers. I closed my eyes. Of course he did. Of course he had chosen flowers. Something harmless looking. Something that let him step across a threshold and still feel like the generous one. Mom. My voice came out sharper than I meant. I gentled it immediately. You cannot let him in again. Her brows drew together. He seemed remorseful. He is good at seeming things. I stood and crossed the room because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. Did he say anything? Ask anything specific? Only where you were working now. I told him I was not sure. I turned back so fast the floor creaked. You did not tell him Bella Rosa? No, she paused. But I did say you were always busy on Friday nights. I let out a slow breath and pressed 2 fingers to my temple. That had been enough. For Derek, crumbs were invitations. Patterns were maps. I am sorry, she whispered. The sound of it snapped something in me. No, do not apologize. He is the problem, not you. She looked down at the blanket, and for a second she seemed older than she had that morning. Smaller. I hated him for that most of all. Not what he did to me. What he could still do to the feeling of safety in this apartment with a single knock and a practiced smile. I crossed back to the bed and sat beside her again. Listen to me, I said quietly. If he comes here, you do not open the door. I do not care if he brings flowers or soup or a handwritten apology and a rescue dog. You do not let him in. My mother managed a faint smile. A rescue dog would be persuasive. Mom, I am kidding. She squeezed my hand. I understand. I wanted that to calm me. It did not. Because understanding was not the same as remembering when the moment came. Because fear was not rational, and politeness was a reflex she had spent 60 years perfecting. Because the world had trained women like us to manage male discomfort more carefully than our own danger. I will call the landlord tomorrow about the lock, I said, and maybe get one of those door braces. With what money? She asked gently. There it was. The bruise beneath every plan. I looked toward the kitchen where unpaid bills waited in a crooked stack beside the toaster. Tuition. Electric. The pharmacy balance. My chest tightened. I will figure it out. You always do. Usually those words sounded like praise. Tonight they sounded like a sentence. After she fell back asleep, I stood in the kitchen in my coat and stared at the lock for a long time, as if looking hard enough might make it sturdier. Then I checked my phone. 3 emails from Roosevelt about tuition deadlines. 1 text from Maria asking if I was okay. 1 unknown number with no voicemail. I deleted the number without opening it. Washed my face. Changed clothes. Put a chair under the doorknob, even though I knew how flimsy that kind of gesture really was. At 2:17 in the morning, I was still awake on the sofa with the television muted and every light off except the stove clock when headlights swept briefly across the living room wall. My breath caught. I stayed perfectly still until they moved on. Outside, snow kept falling over the city in patient white layers, covering footprints, softening curbs, disguising all kinds of things that still existed underneath. I must have slept eventually because the next thing I knew, my phone was buzzing violently against the coffee table at 6:43. I grabbed it half awake, pulse already racing. Maria's name flashed across the screen. I answered immediately. What happened? Silence. Then Maria said, voice thin with disbelief. Chloe, Bellarosa is closed this morning. No explanation. No staff meeting. Just a typed notice on the door, and Marco is not answering anyone. And there is a black car parked across the street that has not moved in 20 minutes. I was out the door in under 4 minutes. Hair twisted into a careless knot. Yesterday's jeans pulled back on. Coat over a sweater I had not bothered to fully straighten. My mother was still asleep. I left her a note on the kitchen counter that said pharmacy, not Bellarosa, because I could not explain any of this until I understood it myself. The morning air hit like broken glass. Snow had stopped, but the sidewalks were slick and gray and churned with slush from early commuters. My breath came fast as I hurried toward the train, Maria still on the phone in my ear. Tell me exactly what the sign says, I said. Temporary closure due to management issues, she read. That is it. No logo. No date. Just printed paper taped to the inside of the glass like somebody wanted it done fast. And Marco? Not answering. Neither is Louise from the kitchen. I called Jenna too. She said there are 2 men in dark coats standing by the alley like they are waiting for something or someone. Of course there were. My stomach tightened so hard I nearly missed the curb. Do not go near them, I said. I am already across the street at the coffee shop. Chloe, Maria's voice dropped. Did you do this? The question should have offended me. Instead it just made me tired. No, I said. But I think I know who did. The train ride downtown felt longer than any shift I had ever worked. Every stop was too slow. Every delay felt personal. I stood the whole way gripping the cold metal pole and replaying the last 12 hours in fragments sharp enough to cut. Vincent in the office. Vincent in the diner. Vincent in the SUV. Vincent saying your manager lacks a spine. Vincent saying it disappointed him. Vincent warning me not to mistake danger for safety. I got off at Grand and walked the remaining blocks fast, my boots splashing through brown snow at the edges of the street. Bellarosa looked wrong before I even reached it. Restaurants were supposed to hum, even closed once. Deliveries. Trash pickup. Prep cooks smoking by the side door. This place had none of it. Just silence. The sign Maria mentioned was taped crookedly behind the front glass, flapping slightly every time the heater inside kicked on. Across the street, a black sedan idled at the curb. Not Vincent's SUV. Smaller. Sleeker. Still too polished for this neighborhood at 9 in the morning. Maria waved at me from inside the coffee shop window, eyes wide above a paper cup. I pushed through the door and found her by the glass, still in her puffer jacket and work sneakers, mascara from last night faintly smudged under her eyes. Tell me I am hallucinating, she said the second I reached her booth. I would love to, I said. But I am trying to cut back on lying before breakfast. She stared at me for one long second. You know him. Not a question this time. A conclusion. I sat down hard across from her and wrapped both hands around the coffee she shoved toward me without asking. I know of him. Maria gave me a look sharp enough to peel paint. Chloe, I took a sip because I needed the heat and a second to think. The man at table 7 last night. Vincent Moretti. Her face went blank, then visibly paled. You are kidding. I wish I were. That was Vincent Moretti, she whispered, glancing toward the window as if the name itself might hear her. Marco said some investor from the north side was coming in. He did not say, she stopped. Oh my God. Yes. And now the restaurant is closed. Yes. Because of you. That part is still under review. Maria sat back slowly, coffee forgotten in her hand. What happened after you left? I thought about telling her none of it. Derek under the awning. The diner. The ride home. My mother. But Maria had covered shifts for me, slipped me extra breadsticks in college when I was too broke for groceries, and once sat in urgent care with me for 3 hours after I burned my wrist on a coffee machine and lied that it did not hurt. She had earned more than my usual silence. Marco fired me, I said. Vincent did not like that. Maria made a sound halfway between a gasp and a curse. That man shut down an entire restaurant because Marco fired a waitress? I do not know if that is what happened. Please, look outside. She had a point. The coffee shop door opened behind me, letting in a blast of cold and 2 suited men who were not trying very hard to look casual. They took a table near the front, ordered nothing, and watched Bellarosa through the window with the still alertness of men who were not there for pastries. Maria saw them too and sank lower in the booth. This is insane. Yes. Are we in danger? The question landed heavier than it should have because I did not have a clean answer. I do not think so, I said carefully. That is not the same thing as no. Before Maria could respond, my phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. My pulse kicked once hard. Do not answer that, Maria said immediately. I looked at the screen. The number was local. No voicemail icon. No label. Just digits. I already knew, before I picked it up, that this was not Derek. Derek called like a man trying to drag you back into a familiar mess. This felt different. Precise. Timed. Deliberate. I answered anyway. Hello. Miss Bennett. The voice on the other end was not Vincent's. Male. Calm. Professional in a way that made me sit straighter instantly. Mr. Moretti would like to see you. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Of course he would. I am busy, I said. No. The man replied with infuriating politeness. At the moment, I believe you are in a coffee shop across from a closed restaurant, asking yourself questions Mr. Moretti can answer. Maria mouthed, who is it? I shook my head once. You people really need hobbies, I said. Mr. Moretti is sending a car. Tell Mr. Moretti I am not one of his employees. He is aware. Then he should also be aware I do not respond well to commands. A pause. Then, to my deep annoyance, the man said, yes. We know. The line clicked dead before I could hang up first. I stared at the phone. Maria stared at me. Outside, the sedan across the street turned on its signal and pulled smoothly away from the curb. Well, she said faintly. That does not feel normal. No, I said. Then I looked out the window just in time to see a familiar black SUV appear at the end of the block, moving through morning traffic with the same effortless certainty Vincent carried into every room. It really does not. I should have said no. I know that now in the same useless way people know they should not touch a hot stove after the skin has already learned the lesson. But at that moment, with Maria watching me like she was not sure whether to be concerned or impressed, with Bellarosa dark behind the window, and a black SUV sliding to the curb like inevitability on 4 wheels, no felt less like a decision and more like denial. Do not get in that car, Maria said immediately. That is my professional advice as someone with absolutely no qualifications except common sense. I let out a breath that almost passed for a laugh. You work brunch shifts in River North. That is a qualification. Chloe. Her voice sharpened. I am serious. I know. I looked back at the SUV. The rear door had not opened yet. No one had stepped out. That was somehow worse. It meant confidence. It meant Vincent Moretti did not need theatrics to get his way. He just needed to arrive. I do not think he is trying to hurt me, I said. Maria folded her arms. That is not the same thing as saying you think this is a good idea. No. Then why are you looking at that car like you are about to prove something to yourself? Because she knew me too well. Because stubbornness had always looked a lot like courage from the outside until the bill came due. I grabbed my coffee, drank the last cold swallow, and stood. Because if Vincent shut down Bellarosa over what happened last night, I need to hear him admit it to my face. Maria stared at me for 1 beat, then muttered something in Spanish under her breath that was probably not a blessing. Text me in 15 minutes. I will. No, you will actually do it, Chloe. This is not one of your fake yes. I know. And if you disappear, I am telling the police everything. I almost smiled. Everything. Everything I know, which is basically nothing, but I will make it sound dramatic. I squeezed her shoulder once on the way out, more grateful than I could say. The cold hit again the second I stepped onto the sidewalk. The SUV door opened before I reached it, smooth and silent. Vincent was inside, already seated in the back, one hand resting against the dark leather, gaze fixed on me through the opening as if the rest of the city had become background the moment I stood up from that coffee shop booth. You are late, I said as I slid in, because apparently my survival instincts were still outsourcing themselves to sarcasm. The door closed behind me with a soft thud. I gave you time to decide, he said. That suggests optimism I do not remember encouraging. The SUV pulled away from the curb before I could reach for the handle again. Outside, downtown Chicago passed in clean winter lines, slush and glass, and steel under a pale sky that had not fully committed to morning. Inside, the heat was low, the silence deliberate. Vincent wore a charcoal coat over a black sweater today, no tie, no visible armor except the kind built into his posture. He looked less like a man heading to a boardroom and more like one who had already bought it. Bella Rosa is closed, I said. No greeting. No preamble. Yes. Just that. One syllable, flat and unashamed. My jaw tightened. Did you do that? Yes. I blinked once, more thrown by the simplicity than I would have been by denial. You shut down an entire restaurant because Marco fired me. No, his eyes stayed on my face. I shut down an entire restaurant because its management demonstrated poor judgment, weak internal discipline, and a tolerance for disrespect that reflected badly on businesses associated with mine. I stared at him. That is the most expensive way anyone has ever avoided saying exactly what they mean. It is also the truth. Your truth is exhausting. So, I am learning. The answer hit me sideways because there was no arrogance in it. No smug satisfaction. Just observation. I hated that. Hated that every time I approached the edge of writing him off as another powerful man with control issues, he said something that shifted the ground under that conclusion. People work there, I said. People need their paychecks. Including you. Do not do that. Do what? Turn ordinary facts into pressure points. His gaze sharpened slightly. You think I closed Bella Rosa to punish Marco and prove something to you. Did you not? No. He leaned back a fraction, still composed, still infuriatingly calm. I closed Bella Rosa because if a place cannot protect the women who work there, it does not deserve to keep profiting from their labor. The sentence landed hard enough that I actually forgot my next one. For a second. One dangerous, stupid second. Then I found my anger again because it was safer than what had just flashed through my chest. You cannot decide that for everyone. Apparently I can. That is not the point. No, he said quietly. It is not. The SUV turned onto Michigan Avenue, traffic thinning as we moved north. I looked out the window so I would not have to look at him. You do not get to play hero because you felt disappointed by my manager's lack of a spine. I am not playing anything. Then what is this? I turned back to him, voice sharper now. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like a man used to controlling outcomes decided my life was the latest thing he wanted to fix. Vincent's expression did not change much, but the air did. It always did when something true got close enough to cut. Your life is not broken, he said. Your circumstances are. That is not better. No, he agreed. It is simply more precise. I laughed once, short and incredulous. You hear yourself, right? Always. That must be unbearable. Not to me. That almost made me smile, which annoyed me even more. I folded my arms and stared him down. You do not protect people if the first thing you take from them is choice. There. I had not planned to say it exactly like that. But once it was in the air, I knew it had been waiting. Vincent went completely still. Not cold. Not angry. Thinking. The city moved outside us in mute reflections while the silence between us thickened, not with danger this time, but with something stranger. Recognition, maybe. Or impact. Say that again, he said at last. I frowned. You heard me. I did. His voice lowered. I want to hear whether you mean it. The nerve of him. The sheer unnerving seriousness of him. Of course I mean it, I said. You cannot sweep into people's lives, make decisions on their behalf, and then call it care just because your intentions are more polished than everyone else's. He held my gaze so steadily it felt like standing in front of a mirror that knew too much. And if the choice they would make is unsafe, then you respect them enough to tell the truth and let them choose anyway. My pulse was beating hard now for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Otherwise it is not protection. It is control with better manners. Something changed in his face then. Small, nearly invisible, but real. Like a locked door inside him had opened a quarter-inch and let cold air through. He looked away first, toward the window, toward the gray river and the moving city beyond it. When he spoke again, his voice had lost that polished edge it usually carried like steel. No one has ever said that to me before. That sounds like a problem. It is. He turned back slowly. I am beginning to think you exist primarily to identify them. I should have rolled my eyes. I should have thrown another sharp answer between us and kept the balance where I understood it. Instead I just looked at him, at the man who could close a restaurant before breakfast and still somehow sound almost unsettled by being corrected in the back of his own car. Then here is another one, I said. If you really care what happens to the people at Bella Rosa, open it back up. Pay the staff for the days they miss. Fire Marco if you have to. Do whatever powerful men tell themselves is efficient. But stop burning down other people's stability because you are angry on my behalf. Vincent said nothing for a long beat. Then he gave one slow nod, as if accepting terms in a negotiation he had not expected me to win. All right. I blinked. That is it. That is it. Suspicion rose immediately because nothing with him was ever that simple. You are agreeing too fast. No, he said. I am learning quickly. Then he leaned forward and tapped once on the partition. The SUV began to slow. I looked out the window and realized, with a fresh drop in my stomach, that we were no longer in traffic. We were turning into a private underground garage beneath a glass tower I recognized from the skyline and could never have imagined entering. Where are we? I asked. Vincent's gaze met mine, unreadable again, but no longer untouched. To the place where I intend to prove, he said softly, that I did listen. The garage was quieter than any place beneath downtown Chicago had a right to be. No shouting attendants. No screech of brakes. Just polished concrete, white strip lighting, and the low purr of expensive engines cooling in neat lines that looked more curated than parked. The SUV rolled to a stop beside a private elevator with smoked glass doors and a brass panel that reflected the overhead light like still water. I did not move right away. You brought me to your office? I asked. Vincent unfastened his seat belt with that same measured calm he seemed to apply to everything, then turned toward me. No, that is not reassuring. It is not meant to be. It is meant to be accurate. Of course it was. He stepped out first, then paused outside my door without opening it, as if deliberately leaving the choice to me. It should not have mattered. It did. I got out on my own and looked up at the tower disappearing beyond the garage ceiling. Glass. Steel. Too much money. The kind of building where people like me usually entered through service corridors with delivery carts, not private elevators with a man whose name could close restaurants before breakfast. If this turns into another demonstration of your reach, I said as we walked toward the elevator, I am leaving. Vincent pressed a code into the panel, and the doors slid open without a sound. Then you should know, he said, stepping aside to let me enter first, that I dislike repetitive mistakes. The elevator rose so smoothly it barely felt like movement. No music, no floor numbers lighting up in public view. Just a mirrored wall, dark wood trim, and my own reflection looking back at me with too much tension in my shoulders and not enough sleep in my face. Vincent stood beside me, hands loosely at his sides, not touching, not crowding, but somehow still occupying more space than anyone else could have. You said you would reopen Bella Rosa, I said. I said I would correct the damage done to the staff. That sounds like lawyer language. It sounds like implementation. I glanced at him. You really do not know how normal people talk, do you? I know. I rarely find it efficient. That must make relationships difficult. Something flickered in his expression. Not offense. Not quite amusement. It has made some of them brief. The doors opened before I could answer. We stepped into a space so unexpectedly quiet and warm that I stopped short. It was not an office. It was a private floor, maybe a penthouse level, though the word felt too showy for what I saw. No marble excess. No gold fixtures trying too hard. Just open rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, bookshelves built into dark walnut walls, soft gray rugs, and furniture that looked chosen for comfort instead of display. Chicago stretched beyond the glass and winter light, the river a steel ribbon cutting through the city, the lake pale and endless. In the distance, the place felt powerful, yes, but not in the usual way. Not loud. Controlled. Lived in. That unsettled me more than opulence would have. A woman in a navy suit stood near a long dining table with a tablet in one hand. Mid-50s, silver hair pulled back cleanly, expression composed in that particular way people acquire when they have worked near power long enough to stop being impressed by it. Mr. Moretti, she said. Then her gaze shifted to me, direct and professional. Miss Bennett. This is Evelyn, Vincent said. She manages operations I would rather not mismanage personally. Evelyn's mouth moved at one corner. Not quite a smile, but close. Which today includes correcting an employment issue that should have been handled with more restraint, she said. She extended the tablet toward me. Bella Rosa will reopen tomorrow under interim management. All hourly staff will receive full pay for scheduled shifts missed during the closure, plus an additional week of compensation. Mr. Russo has been removed pending review. I stared at her, then at Vincent, then back at the screen where neat lines of text laid out everything I had demanded in the car with impossible speed and infuriating efficiency. You already did it, I said. Vincent met my eyes. You asked me to stop mistaking force for care. I listened. The words hit harder than they should have. Probably because he had not just agreed. He had changed course. Men with power almost never did that without making you crawl across broken pride to earn it. And the staff? I asked Evelyn, because I needed to hear it from someone who did not look at me like every sentence mattered. Protected, she said simply. No one loses wages because of last night. My shoulders loosened by an inch before I could stop them. Relief is dangerous when you have been braced too long. It makes everything underneath suddenly visible. Marco, I asked. Marco, Vincent said, is learning that employment decisions made from cowardice are expensive. I looked at him sharply. You said you were listening. I am. His voice stayed even. I did not say I had become charitable. Evelyn, to her credit, pretended not to hear that. There is one more item, she said, tapping the tablet. Mr. Moretti acquired a controlling interest in Belarus's parent company at 8:13 this morning. I stared at her. He did what? It was efficient, Vincent said. That is not a normal answer to anything. You have established that I am not normal. No, I said, turning fully toward him now. I established that you cannot bulldoze other people's lives because you can. This is exactly what I meant. He did not flinch. And I told you I was learning. Not finished. I opened my mouth, then shut it again because anger and disbelief kept colliding in the same place. You bought a company before breakfast. Technically, Evelyn said. The transaction concluded at 9:06. That is not helping, Evelyn. No, Miss Bennett. It rarely does. I would have laughed if the whole situation had not felt so absurd. Instead, I walked to the window and stared out over the city because distance, even glass distance, was suddenly necessary. Tiny people moved along Michigan Avenue below, bundled in coats, carrying coffee, living lives still governed by rent and weather and train delays. Normal gravity. Normal limits. Behind me, Vincent said nothing. He was getting better at that. Or worse. I could not tell anymore. Why? I asked finally, still looking out at the lake. Do not tell me efficiency. Do not tell me discipline. Tell me the truth. Silence held for a moment, long enough that I could hear the faint hum of heat moving through the vents. When Vincent answered, his voice had changed again. Lower. Less polished. Because last night, he said, you looked at me like the room did not matter. Like the men around me did not matter. Like fear did not matter. You reduced everything I built to one question. I turned slowly. He was standing exactly where I had left him, dark against the pale winter light, hands empty, expression unreadable in the careful way that always made the truth sound more dangerous when it arrived. Was it right, he continued, or was it wrong? The words landed between us with almost no sound and all the weight of the night before. Most people around me do not ask that question. They ask what is profitable, what is useful, what is necessary. You asked what was right. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Evelyn looked down at her tablet with the refined discretion of a woman who had seen enough to know when something in a room no longer belonged to business. And that matters to you? I asked. Vincent held my gaze. More than it should. There it was. Not charm. Not seduction. Not even confession in the usual sense. Just a truth offered without wrapping paper. That was the problem with him. He could buy towers and close restaurants and move the world with one phone call, but the things that reached me were never the displays of power. It was the fractures underneath them. The moments when he sounded almost like a man trying to translate himself into a language he had never needed before. I folded my arms, partly for balance. You cannot keep doing this, Vincent. Doing what? Using power to get close to an answer you could have earned with honesty. For the first time since I met him, something like fatigue moved across his face. Brief. Barely there. Gone almost immediately. You think I do not know that? I think you are used to results arriving before self-awareness. Evelyn made a quiet sound that might have been a cough or a suppressed laugh. Vincent did not look away from me. That is also accurate, he said. You see, I said softly. That is the part nobody around you is brave enough to say. You do not need more control. You need more people who can tell you when you are wrong before you decide being effective makes you good. The room went still around that sentence. Not tense. Not hostile. Still in the way a church goes still after something honest enough to count as prayer. Vincent took one step toward me, then stopped. Deliberately. A line acknowledged. A lesson remembered. And if I asked you to be one of those people, he said. My heart stumbled once, hard enough to annoy me. Because that was not a demand. Not a command. It was worse. It was careful. I looked at the city behind him, then back at the man in front of it, powerful enough to rearrange streets and businesses and schedules, and somehow standing there asking for something he could not order into existence. Then I would tell you, I said quietly, that for the first time in your life, you might have to learn how to be worth listening to before you ask someone to stay. Vincent did not answer right away. He stood there with the entire city at his back and the kind of power most men mistook for invincibility. Yet in that moment, he looked more still than certain, as if my words had reached a place in him no one else had ever bothered to name. Evelyn lowered the tablet completely now, the screen going dark against her hand. Smart woman. She knew the meeting was over even if no one had said it. I will see to the Bellarosa transition personally, she said, voice smooth and professional. Then she gave me a look that held no pity and, unexpectedly, a trace of respect. Miss Bennet. Evelyn. One corner of her mouth moved. Good luck. With that, she crossed the room and disappeared through a quiet side door, leaving me alone with Vincent and a silence that no longer felt like a threat. It felt like aftermath. I exhaled slowly and turned back toward the window because the lake was easier to look at than the man who had just asked, in his own way, for something he could not command. Below us, Chicago moved with its usual winter stubbornness. Tiny yellow cabs. Tiny bundled pedestrians. Tiny ordinary lives. It was a cruel thing, really, how the world kept looking normal while somebody's entire internal landscape was shifting by inches. You think I do not know how to earn anything, Vincent said at last. His voice was quiet, but not cold. I think you know how to acquire, I said, still facing the glass. That is not always the same thing. Behind me, I heard him move. One step, then nothing. He had stopped himself again. It should not have mattered that he remembered. It did. In my world, he said, hesitation is often read as weakness. I turned then. Maybe in your world, yes. But not in mine. His gaze met mine immediately. And what world is yours, Chloe? I let out a short breath. The one where people do not get extra credit for doing the right thing after they have already made it 10 times harder than it needed to be. That almost smile touched his mouth again. Brief. Tired, maybe. You are ruthless in a very specific direction. I call it consistency. I am beginning to understand that. The room felt warmer than before, or maybe I had finally stopped bracing against it. My pulse had steadied too, though not entirely. There was still something dangerous about this. Not in the obvious sense. Vincent had never been the kind of danger that announced itself with noise. He was the kind that studied your defenses until he found the one built around loneliness and asked, very quietly, whether it was doing its job. What happens now? I asked. For Bellarosa? Or for us? The question landed so cleanly it took a second to breathe through it. You really do not believe in small talk. I believe it wastes time. And here I was hoping for one normal conversation before noon. You forfeited normal the moment you corrected me in public. I should have rolled my eyes. Instead, I almost laughed, which felt traitorous and strange and a little too easy. For Bellarosa, I said, because that was safer. What happens now? Vincent nodded once, accepting the boundary without pretending not to see it. The staff returns tomorrow. New management. Written protections. No one loses wages. And Marco? He will not be managing anyone for a while. That sounds ominous. It is administrative. That sounds worse. His expression shifted, just slightly. You are not responsible for what happened to him. I looked at him steadily. No, but I am still the reason it moved. You are the reason I looked at it differently. The honesty of that did not get any easier to hear. I crossed my arms, not defensive this time, just grounding myself in something physical. That does not mean you get to keep orbiting my life every time you have a revelation. Orbiting, he repeated, as if testing the word. That implies distance. Good. Keep some. He regarded me for a long second, and I could almost see the old instinct in him, the one that would have pushed harder, closed space, turned challenge into pursuit, because that was probably how every other negotiation in his life had worked. But then he did something that should not have felt as significant as it did. He nodded. Not as a tactic. Not like a man humoring someone temporary. Like a man accepting terms he had not chosen. All right, he said. You will have distance. Suspicion rose immediately because I was still me and he was still Vincent Moretti. That was too easy. No, he said. It was difficult. I am simply doing it anyway. I stared at him. Men did not say things like that. Unless they wanted something. But somehow, with him, wanting was becoming less obvious and more dangerous. Less about possession. More about restraint. Why? I asked before I could stop myself. Why agree? He looked toward the window once, toward the city he seemed to rule without ever having to say so, then back at me. Because you were right in the car. His voice lowered a fraction. Protection without choice becomes another form of control. I have no interest in becoming indistinguishable from the men you are trying to survive. That one landed deep. Too deep. I looked away first. Again. It was becoming a pattern I did not appreciate. You make it very hard to stay angry at you, I muttered. That was not my intention. That is the problem. I think you are usually telling the truth. Usually? I met his eyes again. Do not get greedy. Something softened then. Not fully. Vincent Moretti was not a man built for softness. But there was a quietness in him now that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with effort. The kind of effort people rarely noticed because it happened under the skin. I will have Evelyn send the Bellarosa details to Maria as well, he said. She looked like the sort of friend who deserves direct reassurance. That surprised me enough to strip every prepared answer from my mouth. You remember Maria? You say that as though I only notice you. My heart did an annoying, disloyal thing at that. I ignored it. I think you noticed too much. That may be true. The silence that followed was not empty. It was careful. A pause neither of us seemed eager to break the wrong way. Finally, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the slim black card he had left in Marco's office the night before. I had forgotten it was still there. Or maybe not forgotten. Maybe I had just been pretending the weight of it meant nothing. I held it between two fingers and stepped toward the console table near the elevator doors. Set it down. Vincent's gaze followed the movement, unreadable. I am not keeping this, I said. If I need help, I will ask for it. Not because you placed a number in my hand and decided that counted as trust. He said nothing for one beat. Then, understood. I nodded once. Another line. Another lesson. Another small impossible thing he accepted without turning it into a contest. I started toward the elevator before I could think too hard about what that meant. When I reached the threshold, I stopped and looked back. He had not followed. He stood where I left him, tall and still against the winter city, hands empty, expression quiet in a way I would not have believed possible 24 hours earlier. Vincent. Yes. The single word was soft enough to unsettle me more than command ever could have. Do not close any more businesses before talking to me first. That almost smile returned, clearer now, though still brief. That is a surprisingly specific rule. I am trying to make this manageable. Then I will do my best not to destroy the local economy without notice. I shook my head, caught between exasperation and something warmer I refused to name. The elevator doors opened behind me with a low chime. And one more thing, I said. His brows lifted slightly. If you really listened, then prove it by leaving Derek to me unless I say otherwise. The almost smile vanished. Not into anger. Into thought. Into caution. Chloe, that is not an invitation to argue. For a moment I thought he would. Thought I would see the old instinct win. The one that reached for control when concern got sharp enough to scare him. Instead, he looked at me the way he had in the office, in the diner, in the car, and now here, as if every time I drew a line he had to decide what kind of man he intended to be on the other side of it. All right, he said finally. Unless you say otherwise. Relief moved through me, so suddenly it nearly passed for trust. That was its own problem. I stepped backward into the elevator. The doors began to close. At the last second, Vincent spoke again, not louder, just enough to reach me. Everyone in that room went silent because they feared me, he said. I looked up. He was watching me with none of his usual armor left in the sentence that followed. I went silent because, for the first time, someone made me listen. The door slid shut before I could answer. I rode down alone with my reflection and the city dropping around me floor by floor, and for the first time in a very long time, I understood something I had been too exhausted to name before. Power could force a room into silence. Fear could keep a woman alert. Survival could teach her to walk away before anything soft became dangerous. But none of those things were the same as being seen clearly and still allowed to choose. When I stepped out onto the street a few minutes later, Chicago was exactly what it had been all morning. Cold, loud, unimpressed. Taxis sprayed slush at the curb. Wind came hard off the lake. People hurried by with coffee and deadlines and no idea that somewhere above them, a man who could buy half the city had just learned the one lesson money never teaches on its own. He ruled the room. But that morning, for one impossible fragile hour, I learned that even the most powerful man could be changed by the one person who was not afraid to tell him where power ended and character had to begin.